Hi, and welcome back to Psychology with me, Mr. Snyder, and today we are going to talk about intelligence, what it means, where it comes from, what affects it, etc. Let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be talking about the different theories of intelligence, the history of intelligence testing, how we currently assess human abilities as far as intelligence goes. We'll talk about different standards of tests, the influences on intelligence, and issues related to the consequences of intelligence testing. So let's get started. What does intelligence mean? It literally means to choose between. It means learning from your experiences and acquiring knowledge, and how well you do that. How well can you use your previous situations to adapt to new situations and solving problems? There's a couple different theories you need to know about. One is Spearman's theory. This is probably one of the oldest. And Spearman said that you have different factors of intelligence, a G factor and an S factor. The G factor is your ability to solve problems and reason, and it stands for your general intelligence. And then the S factor is your ability to excel in specific areas, known as your specific intelligence. Then we have Gardner's and Sternberg's theories. Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences basically says that there's different intelligences that you can excel at that are independent of one another. So you could be a really good athlete and have great bodily kinesthetic intelligence, but not a musician at all and have very poor musical rhythmic intelligence. So there's different intelligences. You're not going to have to know all 9 of them, but just know the basis behind Gardner's theory. And then Sternberg's triarchic theory, tri meaning 3, means that basically there's 3 types of intelligence. There's your analytical intelligence, which would be school, and like information, analyzing different information like that. Your creative intelligence, which would come to art, music, problem solving. And then your practical intelligence, which is a type of street smarts. How well can you navigate yourself in everyday situations? And people usually excel at one of these, but then they also use more than one factor at the same time. And then as far as psychology goes, emotional intelligence is a pretty new theory. It's a very good predictor of success in life. If somebody has high emotional intelligence, it's the awareness of and the ability to manage your own emotions to facilitate thinking. You have the ability to be very self-motivated and persistent in your life, and you can be very empathetic towards others. And empathy, if you didn't know, is the ability to understand what others are feeling, not necessarily feel what they are feeling, which is having sympathy towards them, but just understanding how they feel and adapting to it is empathy. How do we do differences in intelligence? Well, we measure intelligence by IQ tests, and those have their advantages and disadvantages, but geniuses are the people who fall at the extreme high end of the normal curve for intelligence. We may call them gifted. And then people who fall at the other end, we call intellectually disabled. And those are IQ scores that fall well below the mean on a normal curve. And they're divided into mild, moderate, severe, and profound categories. Scores on intelligence tests are represented by the normal curve, or the bell curve, and percentages under each section of the bell curve represent the standard deviation from the mean. And the standard deviation from the mean is the average of all of the scores put together from the mean. Here, maybe this graphic will help a little bit better. The percentages under each section of the curve represent the percentage of the scores falling within that section. So the standard deviation are the little vertical lines on this chart, and each represent a standard deviation set at 100. So the average away from 100, an IQ of 115 on the Wechsler scale represents one standard deviation above the mean. And then we can measure how far away your score is from the average. The area under the curve indicates that 34.13% of the population falls between 100 and 115 on this list. And the average IQ on these tests is 100 by design. So a little more on intellectual disabilities. It's when a person's behavioral and cognitive skills exist at an earlier developmental stage than the skills of other people who are the same chronological age as that person. And usually this person's IQ falls below 70 on an IQ test. Their adaptive behavior towards situations is severely below standards. Limitation usually is noticed in the developmental period when a person is a child. It occurs in about 1% of the total population. And the DSM-5 diagnoses intellectual disability across 3 domains: conceptual, social, and practical. Conceptual meaning their ability to think and conceptualize different things is well below average. Social, their ability to communicate and have empathy towards others, make social judgments and decisions is also very poor. And then practical, their self-management, job responsibilities, hygiene, school, money management, this also falls well below average. And the new DSM-5, which went into effect in 2013, now removes the specific age criteria for these diagnoses. And then the severe, it's categorized in level of severity. Mild is the least severe, and then profound is the most severe. So just to give you a example, individuals with a mild intellectual disability may show deficits as they reach their school age. They can be manipulated very easily, and they're basically people with mild intellectual disability are able to live on their own if they have proper supports when they're older. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have profound intellectual disability. We're talking about people with an IQ of lower than 20. They're very limited to learn beyond simple matching and sorting tasks. They're very poor at communicating. Some may not communicate at all and have to interact non-verbally. They may be able to participate by watching or assisting in practical tasks, but they are totally dependent on others, and they may have multiple physical or sensory impairments. So it is a very sad situation, but it is categorized as a profound intellectual disability. And then giftedness is what we call the 2% of the population falling above 130, and geniuses would be between or above 140 or 145, depending on who you ask. And Lewis Terman is one of the earliest studiers of intelligence, and he would say that the stereotype of the weakling genius is not accurate at all. Basically, the gifted people who are called termites, named after him, they're socially well-adjusted and skilled leaders. They tend to be above average in height, weight, and physical attractiveness. And people, that's between 130 and 180. If we get above 180, we found that these people have some social and behavioral adjustment problems. So now, how do we measure intelligence tests? Intelligence? Well, it goes all the way back to Binet in France. Alfred Binet created a test for the French school system to basically determine who needs special education assistance. And he tested the child's mental age, or their MA, and he distinguished between fast and slow learners for different age groups. Binet and Lewis Terman bring the test back to America and Stanford University and create the Stanford-Binet IQ test. Now, IQ stands for intelligence quotient. So a quotient, we're talking about division, right? Just think that. Divide one's mental age divided by their chronological age, and then multiply that to get by 100 to get their transformed score. So if you are 15 That's your chronological age, and you score perfectly average on your test and get a mental age of 15. We have 15 over 15, which gives you 1, times 100, which gives you 100, and you are perfectly average for your score. This was conducted for different age groups, and we are up to the Stanford-Binet version 5 is used by educators to sort students for special education programs. Nowadays, the Wechsler is more used than the Stanford-Binet because it is designed for specific age groups. Stanford-Binet is for children, but adults are using Stanford-Binet to get their own IQ, and Wechsler didn't think that was right, so he develops the adult intelligence scale, the intelligence scale for children, and then one for preschool and primary scale of intelligence. This yields your verbal score, but it also yields a performance score because you have to do performance-based tasks and not just mental-based tasks. Here's an example of stuff you would find on the Stanford-Binet test and when the average age of the child is that they can perform this. Here is sample items from the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. You can see there's the Verbal Comprehension Index, the Perceptual Reasoning, Working Memory Index, and Processing Speed Index. So people prefer the Wechsler because it gives you a more comprehensive view of the person's intelligence. How do we construct a test? Well, to get a good test, you need a couple of different things, and one of those would be reliability and validity. And reliability is, does the test give you consistent results again and again each time it is given? And then validity is, does the test measure what it is supposed to measure? So for example, I like to use the simple example of a scale. The scale is a test of your weight. Mr. Snyder hops on the scale. It says 150 pounds 3 different times. Is that test reliable? Yes, it is, because it gives me the same result every time. Is it valid? No, I do not weigh 150 pounds. So a test can have reliability without validity. Couple other characteristics that tests need to have are standardization, which is giving the test to a large group of people representative of the actual population the test is designed. The administration of it needs to be consistent and have standard methods of test administration. So with the SAT or the PSAT, that's a standardized test. It gives you a book. It gives the teacher a book of exactly what to say to each testing group, and they can't deviate from that. And then the use of comparison group whose scores are used to compare individual test results. That's how we get the norms. The norms are the scores from a standardized group of people, and we find the norm of your score. What is a normal score on the test? And that's how we determine the average of the test. And then you already know standard deviation, which is the average variation of scores from the mean. What is a normal curve distribution? It's a bell curve, which is, if we have a normal curve, that means the test is more accurate, and it tests deviation IQ scores. How useful is an IQ test? It basically means that it is valid for predicting academic success and job performance, but also there are things that can throw off test scores, which is self-regulation or levels of motivation that day. What if I'm just not motivated to take an IQ test? Well, I'm going to score lower, but does that mean that my intelligence is lower? No, I just didn't want to do that well on the test. Twin and adoption studies are ways that we can describe and measure the influence of biological, cultural, and environmental factors on intelligence. We measure and we take a look at the IQs of identical and fraternal twins that are reared together or raised together and raised apart. We find that we have stronger correlations between IQ scores as the amount of genetic relatedness increases. The heritability of IQ is estimated at 50%. So that means that it's 50% nature and 50% nurture, pretty much. Estimates of heritability apply only to changes in IQ within a group of people. So we can't basically generalize this to everybody. And then the Flynn effect, just so you know, is the steady increase in IQ scores from generation to generation. So the average IQ is always meant to be 100, but the average IQ score in 2015 is much higher than it would have been in 1915. We are smarter today as a people than people were in 1915. Here you can see the effect of nature on the left and the effect of nurture on the right for different groups of people with various relationships. You have identical twins together, fraternal twins together. Basically take a look at that. The degree to which people are related has a better influence on your IQ. What is cultural bias and how does it affect the consequences? Cultural bias is interpreting and judging answers to questions based on the standards of the test maker's culture. So a test maker from America, and if they make the test for somebody from America, somebody from Guatemala might not have the same answers as somebody from America because their culture is different. Now, does that mean they have less intelligence? Absolutely not. And some people think that it's impossible to design a test that's free of cultural bias. A culture fair test is one that basically asks you to measure nonverbal abilities like the ability to rotate an object. That shouldn't change from culture to culture. But unfortunately, it cannot measure important abilities like verbal knowledge according to that person's culture. And then lastly, the last thing I want you to know is stereotype threat, which is if you are made aware of a negative performance stereotype on a test, that means that you are going to do worse on that test if you consider yourself a part of that group. So if I say whites do poorly on this test, and I tell you that beforehand, then that means that you believe and you will do worse on that test if you are white. So that's all I have for you today on intelligence. I know it was a lot, and it was not very in-depth, but it was a lot of breadth of material. So fill out your learning targets. We'll talk about any questions you have in class the next time I see you, but have a good day. Bye-bye.